And that's us off. Right, everybody. I'm really pleased to say we have Robin McAlpine here. He's been the director of the Commonweal for a long time. Is it at least 10 years? It's probably longer than that, isn't it, Robin?
Well, I mean, I'm not the director anymore. I
Hmm.
stepped aside for to enable me a little freedom, shall we say, to do some other things. But yeah, no, I mean, this is the 10th anniversary of Commonweal. It was established as a project 2 years before that, then spun out in its own as its own organisation the month after the referendum. So we're nearly about to hit our 10th birthday.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I mean, that's great, Robin, because I don't want to do too much of a going back in history and stuff. But would you, just for the sake of our viewers, yeah, just give us a little bit more history about the Commonwealth, how it's set up, coming out of the referendum from the Jimmy Reed organisation and stuff, and maybe explain a little bit of what the goals were.
Oh, I mean, it was very straightforward. I
Mm.
mean, I'll tell you the full story. I've told this before, but I'll tell you the story again. So it was about February 2012, and I'd been increasingly aware that the Yes campaign. I mean, just as a reminder, I'm a professional campaign strategist, so I was aware that the Yes campaign was kind of coming off the rails at the time. And again, it's funny, people don't remember what the actual sequence of things, but for the first part of at least 2012 and beyond, the whole thing was an argument between John Swinney with a spreadsheet that said people would be £500 better off, and the unionists at the time of the spreadsheet saying would be £500 worse off. And that was about it. I mean, that was about the totality of the debate. Everything else had been about process and whatever. And it was continuing this crazy idea that this was just like a marginal constituency electorate where you had to focus on swing voters and accept that low turnout was the inevitability, poor people don't vote and so on. And it was awful. It was failing. We weren't making any progress. It wasn't working. So I went to go and talk to some of the key players. So obviously I was heavily involved in the Radical Independence campaign. But I went to see Yes Scotland. I went to see, it was actually Nicola Sturgeon I had an hour with. And what basically happened was I was trying to find out if there's a plan. So did the SNP have a secret plan in the drawer? And I was very surprised to find out that no, they were just on, doing it all in the hoof. They hadn't stopped to work out how they were going to win the thing, really. Yes, Scotland was, and for me, an equally bad, if not slightly worse position, which was that they were all convinced that the key to INDIREF was not alienating, what was the term, aspirational middle class voters. So not alienating aspirational middle class voters was what was Yes Scotland's campaign strategy at the time. So I referred to it as the procession. They took the view that if you just kept plugging away a mildly positive case over 2 years, gradually a procession of people would come to you, but it wouldn't include the housing schemes because they don't vote. Now, I was sitting with them with data sheets saying, look, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. If we do not get people from lower socioeconomic groups who haven't voted before, if we do not get them, we will lose badly. The numbers, they were averaging numbers across society to get us closing the gap, but that was across society. It would only work if all of society was coming out and participating in voting. And neither the SNP nor Yes Scotland had thought for a second about turnout among low participation groups, but it was always key. It was clearly key. So what happened was I came out and I was standing on the step of the Yes Scotland office at Holmesdale. There was nobody else to meet, nobody else to go and see. Just put the phone on silent for you and hope nobody calls. And so I'm sitting in the rain in Hope Street. Well, I was actually sheltering under the door because it's pissing with rain. And I phoned about 6 people and said, "This is screwed. They don't know what they're doing. If we can't offer, if they can't offer something to voters to make them feel that this is worthwhile, because it's a big decision. if you can't offer them something more than freedom, have pride in your country, a lot of these key voters weren't going to turn out. So that was basically what we did, and it started out first of all as a project, and it was a very straightforward project, which was the economics were dire. Like I say, it was two spreadsheets battling each other with the Institute for Fiscal Studies saying the sky's going to fall in. And no real sense of what was the purpose. What's this for? Getting rid of English rule or whatever. No, what's it for? What do we do with this afterwards? So what we did was I basically just assembled a group of reform-minded economists, and we did a paper. And the paper was called A Nordic Transition for an Independent Scotland. Now, or was it a Nordic economic transition for it? Either way, it wasn't. It was a discussion paper. It wasn't at this stage meant to particularly be anything. So we did that paper over about 6 weeks, and we started doing some meeting with it again. We met Nicola Sturgeon, who kind of looked at it and said, I don't disagree with anything in this. And we're like, yes, so what, you're actually going to advocate a much flatter income distribution in a society with higher taxes, higher wages, and better public services? And the answer was no. She just meant, I don't personally object to any of this, but it doesn't change our strategy. So it didn't. Nothing particularly changed. So what happened was that it was. I mean, I remember it quite clearly. It was May, beginning of May. It was a Saturday, and I was just putting pizzas in the oven, and a couple of beers, and I was chatting to the kids, and the phone went, and it was Tom at the Sunday, at the Sunday Herald at the time, and said, "Listen, we're pro indie. We're all pulling our hair out here because we haven't got any positive stories to write. There's nothing positive in this. We're trying to put a positive case, but what we're being fed to put forward a positive case was, or at least an exciting case, an interesting case, but what we're being fed is just dull. It's just a downward spiral of dull." And I said, right, look, it's Saturday night. You're about to go to print. I've had a few beers. Can't help you now. But if you phone me on Tuesday, I'll sort something out for you. So what happened was I says, right, bugger it, we'll just put this paper out. But we couldn't put it out called that. I mean, it couldn't be called that. It's a terrible name. So what we did was I had a network at the time of poets, artists, writers, and language people and thinkers, which I kind of used every so often. So I just fired out an email to them and says, listen, folks, we've got this paper and it's about this transformation of Scotland and an economic model to something that looks more Nordic, but we can't call it Nordic. Nobody knows what that means. What should we call this? And it was basically Ruth Wishart and James Robertson replied and said, just say it's Commonweal. It's for the Commonweal. That's the purpose. That's what you're trying to talk about here. So I just did. I mean, literally just in the Tuesday, that came in the wedding and the Monday. So on the Tuesday, I just did so on the Monday morning, I just did a search and replace in the paper, and wherever it said Nordic transition, changed it to Commonweal. Tidied it up, got it set for publication, gave it to the Sunday Herald on the Tuesday, and it got a front page and 2-page spread on the Saturday and the Sunday. It kicked off. I mean, it really kicked off. People were like, finally, something we're excited to talk about. I mean, it's not exactly a modest claim, but I think it's an accurate claim. The idea really did pioneer the thought that actually we could all get engaged in imagining an independence. So it was quite shortly after that you got quite a lot of groups coming out and saying, actually, no, this is what we would do, or actually, this is what we think it could look like, or here's the positive case. And so it really was that last 18 months, not even quite that, when you got this big rainbow campaign that everybody remembers. But that was the last 12 months, 14 months, and it was scrambled together by an amateur grassroots, which I'm sorry, there was a debate after the referendum about whether. Sorry, I should probably explain this to people because you never heard it. There was a debate that you weren't involved in after the referendum, which basically ran like, did the rainbow non-party part of the campaign, did it save us or did it sink us?
Mm.
And I mean, it shouldn't really be a question because you can just empirically look and say, no, it unquestionably saved us. If we hadn't managed to get the turnout among lower participation people that we were looking at, if we hadn't inspired so many people to change minds, we'd have lost in a way which was going to put it off the table for a generation. However, that was not the view of those at the top of the SNP at the time. And their view was that the Rainbow campaign had alienated the aspirational middle classes and caused them to stay home, which was why, and they firmly believed that if they played it as a cautious, triangulated campaign, they would have just creeped over the line. And it's absolute bollocks. It's absolute rubbish. So what effectively happened was that the SNP set itself on a course which was to deny the independence movement 3 times before breakfast. And it lost its momentum and it lost its purpose. And a lot of people tried to keep it going. But I kept saying to folk, none harder than fighting a fight that's not happening. Very difficult thing to do. It's just hard to keep discipline if you're trying to have a fight and the other side ain't playing, or there's no organised fight, or there's no organised discussion or debate, and it petered out. But in any case, what we did with Commonwealth, we went straight on to what we had to do anyway, which was what we were set up for. We spun out as the Reid Foundation was never really a helpful home for this project because I'd pushed it quite far to get us to do it, because the Reid Foundation was very much cross-party and it was a lot of Labour people who were involved as well. And while it was more the Labour for Indy side of things, post-referendum, it would have been difficult to sustain a pro-independence position. So we spun it out, and it spun out as its own organisation. And we went on to do what we're always there to do, which is influence domestic policy. And I can't emphasise this enough. We are a think tank which supports independence. We are not solely pro-independence think tank. There's more to the world right now than just something that might happen in the future. You've got to deal with the world as it is now. And that's what we were trying to do. So there we go. We've been going for 10 years. I'm proud of what we've done. We've had some real influence with some real, influence. We've had some real changes, and we'll keep doing it. We'll keep trying to build up not just a portfolio of really good ideas for Scotland and things it can do, but also try to keep informing people that this is not the only way. This is not the end story. We have not reached the end of history. It is still possible to make things better.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's a good history there. So yeah, a couple of things about that then is interesting, which I sometimes I bring up, but not a lot of people speak about, because I suppose some people are quite nostalgic. You know, obviously with Sturgeon incoming, and you know, we should probably speak about that for a minute. And lots of people are not happy. Some people still the diehards and stuff. But you know, Alex Salmond, you know, even though you know he's credited for getting the the referendum and stuff, but like you said, you know, at that time the Herald's desperate for something, and they just have this plan to reach out to the aspirational middle classes and stuff. Do you think that Salmond and the SNP did a rubbish job back then, really, or do you think they could have done a lot better, shall we say?
I mean, look, the NDA project, if you can't sit down and see how you could have done it better, you're not paying attention. That, you know, I used to play rugby, and as my coach would always tell me, so I played rugby in the straddled the arrival of the professional era. I played a reasonable level, but I didn't want to be a pro rugby player. I'm not sure I ever could have been. So I kind of straddled that era, and it had gone all chalkboards and whiteboards and pens and diagrams and all this kind of stuff. So that was all just coming in at this point. We had an old school coach, the indomitable Alec Paxton, and he told me something that I've got to say. At first I thought it was a bit fatuous, and then the older I get, the more I realise, no, he's spot on, which was, right, we can draw the diagrams you want, but the game's played in front of you. And you've just got to You've just got to get on with what's there. Now, the reason why I'm a little sympathetic to it was a lackluster campaign from the SNP during the campaign. The reason I'm a little bit sympathetic or willing to give some ground was the mistake wasn't made in 2011 or 2012. The mistake was really made in the 90s when the SNP, and it genuinely was carrying the weight of Scottish independence heavily in its own bag. But the SNP did not do the work. That's the fundamental difficulty. It either needed to pursue serious internal policy development work, or so I'm just going to get you somebody to wave a boot. Oh no, I can't find it. It's here somewhere.
Would you not? I mean, to me, that sounds like.
What I was going to say was, sorry, what I was going to show you was I've got a full set here somewhere, but everyone's a bit chaotic. I've got a full set here of the policy papers that the SNP did in the 1970s.
All right.
And early 80s. So by the mid-80s, the SNP had a full suite of policy stances and everything: currency, borders, marine, economy, the whole thing. And if you look through it, it's very common. You folks would like it. It was serious work done in the 70s and in the early 80s. It's a big industrial strategy, which would be quite good for Scotland just now. So all that work was getting done then. But with the arrival of the 90s, and it all went Scottish Parliament, and the SNP was going through conniptions about whether to support the Constitutional Convention or not, and then it chose not to, and it was in the wilderness for 5 years, and then it U-turned, and it rejoined, and then they all campaigned together in 97. That absorbed the 90s. And then it was all about Parliament. So nobody set up a think tank to do this work. It wasn't done in the body of the SNP, so the work wasn't done. Which means that a decade later, it's all been devolution. It's all been about the Parliament, which is understandable again. This is why you can't have a political party as a catch-all for everything. It's got a day job. So by the time you got to 2007, they had a very specific task, which was make a government work. And that takes 5 years, 4 years. But this is the key point. Nobody thought they were getting a pro-Indy majority in 2011. So there was no preparation. But I'll put my hand up and say, look, if you'd asked me in 2009, 10, what's the biggest issue facing the SNP, I would not have said lack of a detailed prospectus for independence, on the basis that I think the best of us thought it was going to take a couple of terms before they'd be anywhere near establishing the criteria that would give a referendum or any big major push. But it was just a fluke. It was just a fluke. It was a very strong performance, 2011, but it still wouldn't have worked if it hadn't been for just a set of circumstances that gave an overall majority to one party. Now, I'm sceptical that'll happen again in the Scottish Parliament, but it did. So suddenly the SNP had the power, apparently, to call a referendum, and it went straight into process negotiations. So what I'm saying is it had to improvise a campaign as it went. And on that basis, I will give it some leeway here, because that's not easy. What I can absolutely tell you is that the heart of the campaign it was a mistake. So a big part of the heart of the SNP campaign.
So do you think, like you said, they just wasn't committed enough? They were just taking it too softly?
No, the contrary. They were paralysed by this thing that they'd been. They were. It was more.
So like, I meant. Sorry, Robin. I meant committed to like giving off some kind of policy, some real policies, some more commonweal kind of policies.
But before you get to, you see, the problem is before you get to detail and strategy, I cannot urge people enough. Whenever they're trying to work out what's going on in public affairs at the top of corporations and governments or anywhere else, it is important that you take 5 minutes to remember this is a bunch of people whose kids kept them up awake last night, baby, or who's got a leak in their back garden, or who've been struggling to get a plumber, or these are all folk that have got lives and days. And the way that they make decisions cannot be not influenced by that. You know, their world, their hopes, their fears, their people. So when you've got the SNP who's had this thing dropped on them, this chance to pursue the thing that for 50, 60 years they have been pursuing, to be honest with you, in rhetoric more than any real chance it was particularly going to happen in that period. And suddenly someone says, right, there you go. It's that, be careful what you wish for, because you've got it. And it's like, oh. Or let me give you another example here. I remember it from the time, which I thought was a very good analogy. There was, what was it called? Chuckles. So there was a plastic monkey. It was either nursery, I was at nursery when my daughter was at nursery. So when she was at nursery school, there was this pet monkey. It was a real monkey, doll. I think it was called Chuckles. And Chuckles was given to whomever had been star pupil of the week. So it was just a motivator. And we should go on it was usually some of the older kids that would get it. She was, they're there for 2 years. So, and she'd been talking about getting this monkey forever. And, eventually she was the star pupil and she got the monkey home. She was bewildered. She wouldn't touch it. She sat it somewhere careful and was scared to touch it. She built up this monkey and the possession of this monkey so much in her head. It was so fundamental to her relationship to the nursery that when it fell in her lap, she froze. She didn't know what to do with it. It was overwhelmed. She didn't know how to deal with it. That, I think, is a better way to understand this. They were desperate not to... Think of it as defensive. They were desperate not to kill the cause of independence way more. I don't think they thought they could win it at first. I think they thought it was a staging post, and if they could get support high enough, it would be a marker for the future. And that's what I'm pretty sure that's what people thought internally. I know that some of their strategists would say privately that they didn't think this was their referendum, that they thought the best thing was to have a good, close result. So they were petrified, understandably petrified. That if it had gone south, they'd ended up at 12% support. It started at, let's say it started at 25. If they'd lost 10% rather than adding 20, it could have killed the subject. So they were desperately, first of all, do no harm. They were desperately trying not to kill it. And they were in a place, in a phase where you were talking about highly disciplined Westminster, actually Holyrood government now. Didn't take chances. They were very risk averse. And if you put these two things together, what they were doing was trying first do no harm. Talking about tax rises, that does harm. Talking about nationalisation. And I'm not joking. I've had the conversation with senior strategists. We said, don't nationalise electricity generation just now. It's expensive. But the national grid's cheap as chips. You want the grid in collective ownership. We're the only country in Europe that doesn't own its own electricity grid. So we explained how you could do it. And the simple reality was that the SNP Hoberati, the staff, were convinced that this would just alienate all the voters who'd get shares in the branch of Scottish Power, SPA. Oh, okay, these proteolism.
So that's interesting. Just a point there. That, I mean, I've thought about this. I've thought about this before, but not very often. But because, like you say, I think it was back at 25%, wasn't it, 2012 or something, and it ended up at, was it 46, wasn't it?
45.
So 45, that's right. So, I mean, really, you could class that as a success, and I suppose it really should be, because, like you said, they're looking for a platform, and that's quite a high figure. But would you say then, I suppose, sort of generally, we sort of look upon it as a failure? Do you think that's a problem? Do you think that's kind of holding us back from moving forward, or is there much more other important things at play that's holding back the independence initiative at the moment?
Well, the older I get, it's not even old. It's a professional position here, right? So I was a professional political strategist, political lobbyist, and you don't get prizes for an honourable second place. It's a binary. You win, you don't, and that's it. And no, it was a failure. We lost. but it was a loss that the way to think about it is you have a task and you have the environment it creates. And if you fail the task, it is a fail. I mean, we've got austerity. We get, everything that happened because we failed, right? So never let yourself off the hook. I've got my things for beating myself in the corner there. Never let yourself off the hook. Lost is lost. Fail is fail. It's binary. You win, you lose. End of story. However, when you do fail and when you do lose, you say to yourself, right, okay, that was done. Now the game is in front of me again. How am I playing it now? And in failure and in loss, we fundamentally change the environment enormously. We fundamentally changed the terms of debate. We fundamentally changed the structure of Scottish society and the structure of the Scottish politics. Tip top. Now, here's where I get annoyed. That is not a reason to pat yourself on the back. You failed. You can't cling to the bits of your failure that look good. You say the good bits of our failure are the material for the next thing. And the problem was, this is what really makes me angry. So up until this point, my feelings towards the SNP were frustration, but laced with a reasonable amount of empathy. I understood why they'd got to where they'd got to. I think they made terrible mistakes. It's after this that I start to get, shall we say, upset. Because having changed the conditions, having created this circumstance, what was done with those materials, the raw ingredients from which the future is built or cooked. Once they had all those ingredients, what did they do with them? And they used them to create a leadership cult. All of those materials, all of that environmental change was aggressively channeled into a tight funnel, which bottled it and handed it all to the SNP for its presidential period. In fact, it's not presidential. The term imperial period, for those who are not familiar with it, was originally coined. Actually, I don't know if you know who this. It tends to be a musical term for the period when a group is at its peak. The imperial period of, Acid House being whatever, the late 80s. But it was actually originally coined to about Pet Shop Boys, and I think it was NME where that was originally used, this idea of the imperial phrase. So that has a different meaning now, but it was imperial. It was an empire with a single person at top. And everything in the empire was like a feudal empire. Everything in the empire was paid as tributes upwards. And so what we did was we didn't use those materials, the stuff that we had after 2014. And here's the heartbreak. This is the thing that makes me annoyed. Is you can, and if there's McAlpine skeptics watching this, in the modern world I suspect there probably isn't. If there's McAlpine skeptics watching this, quite serious. It's all binary. You've either done it or you've no. There's no midway point between, it's the pregnant thing. There's no midway point. And if you look at what happened over the last 10 years and ask yourself what's left, what have you got on the ground? What is the architectural ruins of our last decade? And the problem is, I was just for another reason, just checking what the exact definition of ephemera was, because it's one of those words that everybody uses a lot, or some people in my circles use a bit. And I knew what it meant, but I didn't know exactly what it meant. But specifically in this context, ephemera means things that you end up keeping which weren't designed for it. So I've got an Alistair Gray poster, which is an original print, which I keep but it was never meant to be kept. It was advertising an exhibition at the State Bar in Holland Street. And it was a throwaway thing, but it's beautiful. But it was kept. So it's now an ephemera. It's something that it wasn't meant to be there. But ephemeral also just means short-lived things that come and they go. You know, a little treat or whatever, something that didn't. And that's all that was left. It was ephemera. It looked big. It looked like something. But just give it time, and ephemera is swept away. So I'm just going to give the direct comparator, and this is where we need to look ourselves in the eye and say, how did this happen? So in 1979, they held a referendum on Scottish devolution, and they lost. They didn't. They got a majority of the Scottish population voting for, but because they put a threshold vote in, the Cunningham Clause, it failed. The following year, 1980, it was actually my mother that did it, but she wrote a paper for the SNP exec saying that they should set up a constitutional convention to spend the next decade rebuilding the case. Now, actually, the SNP rejected that. It was going into its fundamentalist phase. But a cross-party group was set up, again, Mose were the founders, which was originally called the Campaign for Scottish Assembly. And it became a campaign for Scottish Parliament when they realised that was undoubtedly one of the changes they wanted to make. And what they did was, not what people think they did, weren't out doing what the indie movement did, rap the doors, shout the boat. What they did was they started to do ambassadorial meetings with key groups in Scottish society, regular meetings with the STUC, churches, with individual trade unions, with the with big NGOs and so on. Now, people think that this big coalition that delivered delivered the Scottish Parliament, the settled will, people think that just settled somehow. Did it buggery? I mean, nothing just settles. Folk went out and made that happen. So by 1984, it was the campaign for a Scottish Parliament. They had very good networks. They had quite a lot of people aligned to it. Problem was they were struggling to get the political parties to officially recognise. Everybody else was starting to come around, but they were struggling with the political parties. So they spent a few years and doing some more work, and they built up plans, the detail for a constitutional convention. And they then they had to find a way to bind the political parties in because they were frankly at it. I can't tell you enough. Political parties say things and do things which are quite different. And all these parties were nominally pro-devolution, but none of them wanted to talk about it at official level. So you couldn't actually get the Labour Party, the SNP was 1988. The SNP goes off in a pet. It goes away doing its own road and actively opposes the Scottish Parliament, which I say leaves them 5 wilderness years. I often wonder what would have happened to Scotland had the SNP not walked off the stage at that crucial moment. Narrowly. But, so what they did was, it was a trick, it was a trap. And once again, everybody knows everything in retrospect, which has got bugger all to do, none whatsoever to do with what actually happened at the time. So, everybody knows that the claim of right was a big push to confront Thatcher's government with Scotland's statement of its right to choose its own future. This is not what happened at all. That's just what everybody thinks. What actually happened was they decided that since they thought they had managed to develop the support among 50% of the Labour politicians, and they'd been meeting with individual Lib Dems as well. And so what they realised was that the party had enough strong devolutionists in it that they could take a gamble. And what they did was, the claim of right was an individual signing event. The political parties did not sign it. And what happened was, at first, there were lots of holdouts, Brian Wilson and Tamdale and people like that, the anti-devolutionist wing of the Labour Party from the time. They were all holding out. And then what happened was, it gained momentum. This was the plan. This was always the strategy. It gained momentum. It got about 50% of the Labour MPs, and then some of the others, the softer ones, started to feel a bit exposed. So they signed up until it was like 10 folk that hadn't. And it became who's not signed. and it pressured them. And eventually, even Tam Dalyell, Arch-Revo skeptic Tam Dalyell, was left in a political position where he had no option. So now what you've got is the SNP signed it because it didn't actually commit to a Scottish Parliament. Just we have the right to choose our own form of government. So what you get is everybody signed it. So now, you're not even 10 years past IndyRef, and you've got the STUC and all the trade unions won over. You've got all the churches won over. You've got most of the civic sector won over. You've built all that infrastructure. You've got detailed plans for a constitutional convention all in place. You've got every single political party and every politician in Scotland, barring the Tories, bound in and tied into this process. Within what we're looking at, 1988, so you've still got another year. Within 3 years, the first report of the Constitutional Convention met. Its secretariat was provided by COSLA. Everyone should have said, of course, every single local authority in Scotland was signed up. That was another thing that they did. They went out to local government, took it seriously, and worked with local government to get their support for devolution, which involved negotiation, realising that local government thought it would be a risk to them. Remember, Strathclyde Regional Council at the time was all but acting like Scotland's devolved parliament in an anti-Thatcher campaign. So they were reassured, they were dealt with, they were helped to come in. So COSLA provides the civil servant, provides the secretariat. 2 senior civil servants come in and manage it. And they're, again, the fact that I almost forget their names tells you how wonderful they were, because they weren't big showstoppers. Look at me, look at me. They worked cleverly, assiduously, and really hard to deliver all the partners and to make sure everything worked. Campbell Christie and the STUC were the crucial negotiators in all this. There was a massive amount of work done to drag Labour to eventually where it was. And it was all completed within, what would it be? I think the final report was 91. The final report of the Constitutional Convention was 91, to give it time to report for the 92 general election, which was everyone thought it was all going to be sorted. Kinnock was going to win, Labour was committed, job done. That's 12 years. That's what they did in 12 years. That's what they left behind. That's the architecture that they left behind. You can't even remember the ephemera. The ephemera of that decade is gone. You don't remember the leaflets, the posters, the rallies, the marches, the what. There's no recollection of any of that stuff. And what we've got is a Scottish Parliament because work was done, right? Proper, professional, grown-up work was done. And we've not. What is our equivalent from the last decade? What have we left? So imagine that we're all getting old, and there's another generation has to come in and pick this up. What have we left them? Division, rancor, ego, mess, argument, failure, broken promises. We've changed the environment again, and we ain't changed it for the better. And we should go right now and have a look in the mirror and say, what the hell was I doing to let this happen? However, once you've got that done, the game is still played in front of you, and we are still there. And remarkably, despite all of this, support for independence is now solidified at about 40, well, I can argue 48%, 51%, but I can still tell you that the underlying conditions for a 60% majority are there. We're just not doing the stuff that would deliver it. So I cannot even remember the question. Apologies. And a long history lesson.
No, I think it's really. I mean, I'm sure people will definitely appreciate the history of the build up of it, of like you said. I mean, I suppose what that makes me think of, Robin, is, you know, or say for example, the Commonweal endeavours, you know, since before the referendum and after and stuff. And I don't know how far you think the independence issue or the constitution issue has been set back at present. But I mean, so all the work that the Commonweal does, like you said, it's not just all about independence, or specifically it's a think tank for policies and stuff. And this is one of the things, as you remember, back in the day when we talk about the independence movement as such, you know, these are the things that people rallied behind, because you quite rightly, I remember even saying in that, you know, the old Newsnight from 10 years ago, that you said people do care about this, you know, even though people were telling you they don't, but, you know, they really do. So, I mean, so one thing I could ask you is, over that 10 years, you know, dealing with policies and stuff, how is Commonweal or what is the plan now? Has anything changed, considering that Scottish independence is not really looking coming anytime soon? So what I'm thinking is, for instance, I've moved away mostly a lot from the independence movement, and probably just trying to get back into that old politics again. Of sharing things and trying to get involved at local levels and stuff. How do you? What's your view on that?
Right. Well, quite a lot of people have been trying that, and they're all making appointments to Dignitas. I mean, in Switzerland, it's been hell. It's really difficult. And I mean, just realised, sorry, just as saying that, I was one person in particular who I was thinking of, who's I've got to go up and see her project because they've finally managed to make a breakthrough. But it's like running through treacle with someone chucking broken glass at you to try and get things done in local communities in Scotland. You're not supported to help, and you certainly don't have any power of your own right on your own accord. And part of the problem is that, right, again, I'm kind of taking this up to high level issues here, high level theory, but I think I will anyway. We've just been through this. So there was an experiment in exactly this model of right, well, we can't make the big change, can we make lots of little changes? And it was a group of people, probably around about the New Economics Foundation in London was one of them. Was a couple of the other kind of Labour centre leftist think tanks that were similar. What they said was, we don't have a sympathetic government. We're not going to get a hearing from George Osborne. Far from our economics, influencing government. They're going to be the benchmark which government will measure what not to do. So what do we do in this period? And what their conclusion was basically to take David Cameron at face value with his big society stuff. And right, okay, if it's the big society and it's about setting communities free, we'll just give up working in Westminster and London and get away out and try and tootle about in local authorities or in local communities. And the model they took was the one in Froome, the flat pack democracy, where a bunch of people so sick of the local council and the way it was operating, just organised without a political party and took over the council and started running things for themselves. So the Froome experience was enormously influential on that kind of centre-left thinking in London, and that's what they spent their time doing. It was a disaster. It didn't work. None changed. It didn't work. Now, when I say it didn't work, folks, if you're out in your communities trying to do something good, fight the fight. We're in 2 community groups at the moment around here where I'm trying to get something good done. And we're winning one of them. The other one's, I'm going to get my fighting heat on if we don't see some progress soon. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying don't kid yourself on that in the world of Amazon and Google and Facebook, you can beat them by knitting at home. It's just a misunderstanding of scale of the amount of power which is taking place in society and how it's impacting on people and how much you can actually mitigate it at the far end. And the truth is that if there's not, my view is, if there's not a fundamental reorientation of the relationship between big power in society and citizens, we're going to struggle in a lot of ways. So I understand why people are away to do this. I never stopped. Remember, I do this for a living, so I get to do domestic policy and campaigns and things, on local democracy or the climate change. I get to do all that with my day job, and I get to do the indie stuff with my day job, and then I do the indie stuff with my night job, my personal time and all. So I get to do all these things, and I understand there's lots of stuff that people could go and get on the back of. I think we'll probably talk about why you should all write to an MSP and tell them that you strongly want them to get rid of the National Care Service bill, which is appalling. So I get to do all that stuff. But, and this is the other flip, I'm glad I told you that story earlier on about my rugby coach, because I'm going to say it again. Games played in front of you. Independence is not a set period of time away which you're all just waiting for. It is when we make it. By we, independence movement, political parties, and the people of Scotland. Independence is when we make it. If we got 70% of the population of Scotland calling for independence now, we'd be independent. And that's in our hands to work on. Now, a lot of people then say, well, I'm going to put my stern Presbyterian Robin hat on now. A lot of people say, well, but we can't win them. Have you tried? Oh, I was talking to Betty doing at the bowling club. No, that's that's an argument with your pal. Have we structured a campaign designed to influence soft no voters and run it at a professional quality over a national level to shift the opinion on these subjects by listening to what it is that they're telling us is the barrier for them changing their minds and addressing those things which they are telling us? Is that something we've tried? Right, so in that case, seriously, fuck off. Stop telling me what people can and can't and will or won't think or change or do if you've not tried it systematically and at a level which you might reasonably expect to work. So, I mean, I'll always support the many, many indie initiatives that take place. There are a lot of them, people hope they're going to influence the public, and I'm looking at them and saying it's not, but it influences us, it helps us. So, for example, I supported it. I couldn't go because I wasn't well. The Hands Across Scotland, great, let's do that. But I mean, if you sat down for 2 seconds and said, is that going to change the debate? You see, it's not, though, is it? So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not knocking these things. I'm saying, but we keep saying that it's this far away, and we're not. Let me give you an analogy. We're a bunch of brickies sitting next to a pile of bricks, and one course laid on the foundations, and we're saying, "Oh, fucking hell! It's probably 20 years before this wall will get built." Cup of tea, on about it, take some photos, hold a fundraiser, set up a Facebook group. You know, all we had to do was switch the cement mixer on.
So what is, I mean, help me out here, Robin. I mean, I feel there's a great disconnect, obviously, between say the SNP as example and the indie movement. You know, in my experience, it was co-opted, they let us down, and all the rest of it. But so my question to you maybe is, how do we circumvent that, or how do we get around that? I mean, for instance, our Commonweal going to have more influence if we get a far better SNP than we do have now? Or, you know, how does the movement exert itself? How does it progress when it seems to me we have an SNP really that is anathema really to, you know, getting a referendum or you know, even shouting our sovereignty. I really have this problem with the SNP, this, you know, and the independence movement. I mean, I suppose in one respect though, because there's lots of, you know, there's lots of division, we could call it, in one aspect. But then again, like you said, if it's still at 48%, there's still a lot of people there. There's still a lot of passion there, and it seems to be just sitting there, not doing too much, as it were.
Well, like I say, it's a pile of bricks, isn't it?
Yeah.
Up to us to put it in to get it as a wall. But I'll just answer your question with the same answer. Games played in front of you. I'm a realist. I'm disliked by many in the SNP, by SNP loyalists, because I was trying to warn the SNP that it was going off the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
I was trying to warn that for nearly 10 years, certainly 7. What is really frustrating is that in me saying that, it was inevitably presented as by the SNP leadership as me trying to destroy everything, me trying to break everything. They had this wonderful plan. If only Robin McAlpine would shut up, it would be okay. it's going to take people time to come back around to understanding that some of the critics were not trying to burn everything down, trying to prevent the circumstance in which it would all burn down. And that's certainly one of them. But the flip of that now is, look, let's just be realistic. Remember what I said, no day one. You don't start with a clean sheet of paper. So let me give you two scenarios. These are just making up scenarios, right? I'm not doing either of these, but let's say here's two scenarios. One is somehow rescue the SNP, even from where we are, and the other is seek to replace the SNP. Which task's harder? Well, I warn you that replacing the SNP is much, much harder than people think it is. It's not. The SNP is in a crisis, but it's in a 30% crisis, not a 10% crisis. It's not PASOK at the moment. It's not even 2015 Scottish Labour. It is bruised but living. Therefore, taking it out, replacing it, burning it down and building something else while it's fighting for its life, be hard enough to do it from scratch. If the SNP literally went bankrupt, had to discharge all its members and deregister as a political party, right? So it's gone now. And we were actually literally sitting with a blank sheet of paper and starting again. It would still be difficult. But to do that when you've got an SNP there is not workable. So it's very, very difficult. Nothing's impossible. Nothing's impossible. Things happen. You know,
it's very frustrating, Robin.
I saw in Greece. Not scheduled to go down the tubes. Nobody expected them to go to zero, and things happen. But let's not bank on that. So what we're doing is we're dealing with the situation as we have it, which is in front of us. Do I think this SNP is sufficient? No, not even close. Do I think at the moment the SNP is dispensable? Not really. I mean, I don't really think it is. Therefore, these are the things in front of us. So what do we do with that? Now, I'm holding off. For anyone that doesn't know me, my plans, I've got plans, right? So I sit out here at night and think, right, fuck, what are we going to do now? So I've got a selection of options, which, I mean, I'm on my 17th or 18th fucking internal, so I'm swearing too much, I'm just getting frustrated. My 17th or 18th internal plan for how the hell you could save the SNP. Probably got two or three of them in the back of my head just now, and not all of them involve the SNP doing it on their own, for example. One of the options is absolutely to accept that the SNP is your constituency core, but they're just going to fade and die in the list, for example. So maybe you bolster them on the list with a party that's working. And again, that could be somehow bringing Alba out of its isolation, political isolation, or perhaps, I mean, keep saying this, if 1,000 folk join the Greens, it's your party. If you've got 1,000 pals, I mean, join the Greens, it's your party. Well, you just take it over, you rename it if you want at that point. Maybe one of the options is just an organised members coup inside the SNP. Maybe the option is that a traumatic general election leaves them looking in the mirror and finally accepting that they can't not change.
That's what I'm hoping, Robin. I mean, I suppose.
And it's a very difficult one, that one, because at the same time, I don't want people to underestimate the impact of Labour getting a personnel foothold back in Scotland. 30 MPs is resource and people on the ground, and it's not good. But this is again my anger. The SNP is not going to reform if it just about clings on respectably. And if it doesn't reform, that's when we are looking at a long time before independence again. And the worst case scenario that I've got for you is not that the SNP lose Holyrood. A lot of people think the worst case scenario is the SNP lose Holyrood. No, the worst case scenario is the SNP comes out as the largest party, but with an inability to form a coalition, and gradually falls apart over 5 years as it struggles to put through an unpopular policy agenda riddled with mistakes as public support fades and fades. Because if that happens, the wilderness years don't start till 31. Right? So there's no, when I say you've got to play the game in front, you've got to deal with these things. You've got to know that there's big risks and big gains if you can get things right. And that's where we are. And I'm afraid this is what's really painful for me. And it's not my goal in life. But right now, I think the SNP is like a creature that needs a sharp kicking at. Can't emphasise this. No, I'm not only non-violent, but the idea that I'd be violent towards an animal is just not a thing that's ever going to happen. But it's a creature that needs a kick in the arse. If it doesn't get a kick, I don't see how it's going to wake up. It's getting delusional.
Yeah, it needs a prescription. We just need to figure out what the prescription is, Robin. Robin, a couple more things, maybe just two things, maybe I'd like to, because the care bill you mentioned it earlier, and I think if you wouldn't mind giving us just using this as an example, because like I said earlier, aside from the constitutional issue now and getting into the politics of the UK of legislation that's going to affect us. Can you just, explain to the viewers why you just think the care bill is a shocking example of kind of where we are in the UK today?
It's absolutely dreadful. I mean, it's really dreadful. That you can do it you can do it a bunch of ways. One of the ways I could do it is saying if absolutely every stakeholder hates it, all of them without really any exceptions, why are you going ahead with it? The local authorities are furious. The care sector's very, very negative. Trade unions are up in arms. The workforce isn't happy. The representative carers' bodies aren't over the moon. Nobody's loving this. It's a very bad piece of legislation. So what happened was, just the fast version, is Nicola Sturgeon's under an intense pressure over the care home stuff, as she should be. So she says, well, I'll tell you what, standard practice, big announcement, distract. I'm going to create a national care service, which she'd heard somebody somewhere mention at some point. We'll do that. But the problem is her idea had no content. So what she does is she gets in a bureaucrat to run a programme of what's it going to look like. And it's quite clear the remit was what's the least that you can do and call it a national care service. So he comes up with the most minimalist, it was really not good proposals. And from that, it was still quite hard to work out what the National Care Service was. So they did what they always do, which is they fired it out to big private sector consultancies. KPMG got a lot of contracts. And just for those who don't remember, our National Care Service has been designed by a multinational corporation, which even Boris Johnson banned from government because of serial corruption. So even Boris Johnson said that KPMG was going to be excluded from government contracts in England. Actually, in the end, KPMG read the weather and voluntarily pulled out of going for UK contracts, not Scottish contracts, still all over Scottish government. Corruption doesn't matter up here, So KPMG, Ernst & Young, Deloitte and Touche, it's difficult for me to keep up with. One of the things that I do is I keep an eye on, or someone actually keeps an eye on for me, the Scottish Government's procurement portal, where the contracts that go out to private sector consultancies are on an almost daily basis. And you've got to watch all of these all the time to work out how's government being privatised, because it is. All these contracts went out, and I can't remember exactly who got them all. KPMG definitely got a number of them. And they designed a national care service, which is corporations' wet dream. So the way it's going to work is they're going to take care responsibility away from local authorities. They're going to take it away from public sector delivery. They're going to take it away from local delivery, and they're going to centralise it all in the hands of the minister. The minister will have the right to appoint 2/3 of a care board. The care board will then commission care. So this is a right-wing vision of public services, where you've got an unelected quango appointed by political elites, who's given the entire care budget, give or take, and it's up to them who they buy it from. And if they choose not to buy it from the public sector, that's fine. And believe me, the Scottish Government and the private care corporations are like that. So you're going to presumably get a circumstance where high quality, and just for anybody that doesn't know, this is your granny one day, it's probably you one day. Just for anybody that doesn't know, consistently and regularly, public provision is marginally more expensive and substantially higher quality. If you do need care, pray to God it's in a local authority care home, because if you get the private sector, unless you've got big money, your experience will not be a positive one, or it's likely to not be a positive one, or certainly you're at a high risk of it. There's some good private care homes, often some in the voluntary sector.
I'll just interject there 1 minute. I worked in the care industry. I was a support worker for 15 years, all around the northwest of England, and I won't bore you with any details, but generally, like you said, the public and the private, there was a huge amount of difference when I was working in care homes. And the private ones, there was even one that was public that got taken over by private when I was there, and the price doubled, and the quality of care went down so much, even so much to describe it to you. And the cook there, I knew, he showed me the cupboards and he said, "Look at this, even the quality of the food products went down." But that's of course what's going to happen. They're making profits out of this when they shouldn't be.
People are just interested, just so they understand, because you think care homes are mum and pop businesses run by nice, no, they're not. Care homes are owned by global equity companies that invest in them to release capital quickly. The care sector is dominated by a small group of mega providers, and about half of those are registered in offshore tax havens, or their ultimate owners registered in offshore. So we're going to deliver care through offshore tax havens.
Absolutely.
And the way that they work is when they take over that care home, right, they buy it, and the first thing is they remortgage the property. They take all the value of the property out. So now the people they reduce the quality of foods, they reduce, one of the key things that they did a lot of was they reduced the number of actually medically trained people. So it used to be that you had to have a certain amount of access to an on-call GP, you had to have a certain amount of trained medical nurses in the premises, and they've just been reduced. It's now just a lot of people who can have no more than a week's training handling this whole situation, given medicine. The whole thing is a mess. And what they're doing is they're looking at any cost that can be cut, any asset which can be flipped. So remember how this works. They remortgage, they take the value of what's often prestigious city centre properties, they give it to their shareholders through an offshore tax haven, and then they now pass on what could be double cost for renting this newly acquired building straight onto the public sector. So that money has to come out of the care fees. If you're a local authority and you've owned a care home for 20 years, the capital rental value on it's none. You own it, it's paid for, you bought it, it's there. No, but they're now constantly taking that gain, the gain of paying off property. They're just releasing it so there's no gain. They take all the gain, and those delivering care don't get it. So you take out, look at any asset that you can liquidize and then rent it back at a higher price. You reduce the amount of trained staff, you reduce the quality, you reduce the cleaning rotas, all of it. And that's why they're marginally cheaper than public provision. I'm afraid senior civil servants love marginally cheaper because they're spreadsheets. So that's what they've done. They've basically created a system where they can cut out the whole of at a whim any time now or in the future. And this is the other thing that I want to emphasise. None of this is written in the bill. This is what's known as an enabling bill. The bill tells you nothing about what a national care service will do, or how it will operate, or what it will look like. Basically, all it does is it allocates the powers to design that care service on the fly by ministers, but that just means senior civil servants. So they can just privatise the entire care service at their leisure until it is one corporate entity. At which point, as you know, what will happen is the senior civil servants responsible will then retire from the civil service and get positions on the boards of the mega corporations who now own care.
Exactly.
So there's one thing that I would urge everyone to do, which is tell your politician this must be stopped. And if you want to go further, one of the things, if I can get time today, I need to finalise, is we've got a full set of amendments. You know, yellow, cut this, red, add this. Full set for the whole bill. And let's just say there's quite a lot of cut, rather a lot of add. But to be quite honest with you, if people added one thing, it would transform this bill, which is we just put in our
it's like capitalism. It's like modern capitalism 101. And I do wonder sometimes when you hear about, you know, like this particular care bill that you're on about, just formalising it, you know, the privatisation. It's absolutely shocking. It is, what is it going to take to sort of galvanise people?
Well, like I say, one amendment changes this. It'd be better to do them all, and then you actually get a good national care service, because for those who don't know, we published an entire book. I mean, it was one of the pieces of work that I'm proudest of having been involved in.
Which is this one, Robin?
It's called Caring for All, and
it's
genuinely a radical vision.
I shall definitely get a copy of that, Robin.
It's on our website, www.commonweal.sc. You can download it for free. Buy a copy. It's a £5 if you want a hard copy. But that is, the reason why I said that I was one of the pieces of work my entire career I'm proudest to be involved in, I think that provides creates a national care service which is as revolutionary as the National Health Service was nearly.
That does sound very intriguing.
But if you can't get all the way there, or you're wrestling with your politicians, just tell them one thing. What is their objection to putting one binding principle in earlier? And that principle is care will always be delivered on a not-for-profit basis.
I couldn't agree more. That is absolutely perfect, Robin.
It doesn't cut out the remaining churches who run care homes. It doesn't cut out the remaining voluntary sector organisations that run care homes, but it takes private equity out of the room so that it cannot exploit your poor grandmother or your poor grandfather in the last days of their life. So just call that one simple thing. You want your loved ones throughout their life, and it's not just care homes. It's everything from pregnancy support services all the way through to housing, social work, all of it, addiction services. If you want the best quality that you can get for those, keep it public. That simple. Do not let them privatise it. And so I'm urging you, please, anything you can do. It's one of the most awful pieces of legislation in the devolution era. It should get stopped.
Yeah, it's frightening. There's so many. I think it's probably the most particular one, and it is, like I said, it's close to my heart subject. And everybody, when they stop to think about it, it's like you say, their parents and their grandparents.
Nobody will not need. Literally, end of story. None of you won't need care. You will need care from before you're born. You will need care. This is not medicine. This is care. You will need your parents supported to become new parents, because we all need it. You will need your parents to be taught how to deal with all of your newborn stuff. You will go to some form of childcare. You will be, this is if you're lucky, you will be, at which point you will go into work, and at some point you will need care. It could be financial stresses. It could be someone in your family with addiction. It could be mental health difficulties. It could be a car accident that leaves you infirm and you need an adaptation to your house. It could be that your gran goes into care and suddenly you're deeply involved. A loved one, if you're really, really unlucky, a loved one could get a terrible debilitating illness and you could become the primary carer, in which case your life is now perpetually gone. You have no life. You have nothing. All of these things there's no way you're getting from birth to death without needing care. This is your fight. You will regret it if this happens. You personally. This isn't one where I'm asking you to fight for the greater good. Just be selfish. Just be selfish and go and tell the Scottish Government, I want my care highest quality, I want it regulated, and I want it public and not for profit. And if you do that, they'll lose.
Absolutely. I got to say, right on. There's an old expression for that, Robin. I tell you what, would you do me one favour just before I let you get off and get yourself sorted? Thanks very much for all your time. I've just noticed, curious. I mean, another person whose Marmite was. I remember watching a while ago George Galloway when he's seat in Richmond and stuff, talking about independence and stuff. And then, of course, I remember thinking, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, I wonder if he'll run independent and stuff, which he is. Don't know what Diane Abbott's going to do, but just out of, for a little light entertainment, as it were, how are you looking at, is there anything in this independence thing in this UK election? I mean, for instance, is it going to make any kind of a march? Do you think it will have any kind of anything at all, even some talking points for the electorate?
I'm afraid that old quip about if voting changed anything, they'd abolish it remains true.
Yes.
It remains true in Britain. The first past the post system kills everything apart from the big two. Which is just that the voting system is designed for. It's an elitist voting system. It's about oligarchies giving the plebs a chance to make some minor choices for themselves. But let's be absolutely honest with you. It's now virtually impossible to separate David Cameron and Keir Starmer, for example. Keir Starmer is a bit different from Rishi Sunak, but that's only because Rishi Sunak's different from Cameron. Cameron, May, Starmer, they're not really ideologically separable. If anything, I sometimes think that Theresa May is probably slightly on the left of Keir Starmer. Certainly less nationalistic in her foreign policy stances. So you get a choice, but not much. That's the point of it. And if they get a choice, so what I think is the only thing that's to play for in this is go back to the beginning. How does it change the environment? So we can't win this. There's no winning this election. Good people want a better Britain. They've got no chance of getting that out this election. So the question is, what can the election change? And one of the things the election can change is it can put the fear of God up the complacent Labour Party that Starmerism is stomach-turning rubbish, right? And they can do that if his Gaza position is relentlessly exposed in Muslim communities. And they can do that if his climate change position is challenged by a couple of Greens. And they can do that if a few independents take them on if Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott stand. I hope to God she does. I mean, I really hope she does. The treatment of her has been, I'm going to go, not saying disgraceful, I'm going to say it's absolutely patently outright racist. It's worse than any of this treatment of Diane Abbott has been more racist than any of the anti-Semitic or the majority of the anti-Semitic stuff that was used, weaponized against. It's clear what they've been doing all the way through this. Corrupt, and it's dishonest. I hope she stands. So let's be honest. There's a small number of, no, it's not that small. There's quite a few people on the Labour backbenches who don't like Starmerism either. The stronger their hand is, the better. The weaker his hand is, the better. But more to the point, what happens in the next, to be honest, this is the way Britain works, is we're much more likely to be playing for the next election than anything before that. So, what difference does it make? You've changed the conditions. You've changed the conditions. The more that the politicians are forced to face the disillusionment, the scunneration of the population of Britain.
Scunneration, I like that.
the more chance that we have of ending up one day in a politics that might make a difference. So it's holding two thoughts in your head at the same time. One of those thoughts is there is absolutely no way you can stop what is going to happen over the next 5 years in Britain. Nothing that you can do unless you have, and this is a joke, please don't phone anybody, unless you have high levels of skills at improvised explosive devices, then there's nothing that you can do to prevent what's going to happen over the next 5 years. The British establishment has decided what is going to happen over the next 5 years, but you can change the tone of debate in which they are going to do it. Seems largely true in Scotland, although it's a different situation. You can change the tone of the debate around about how they do it, and you can change how they go into 20. Hell's teeth, what is the next? If this is 2024, the next was 29. So 29. Yeah. Assuming they do a full term, what you can do is change the terms which 29 could be for. And it ain't much to hope for, but Starmer's not a young man, and it's not entirely clear to me that by the end of the next 5 years, he will be the man leading the next election. Unfortunately, they've rigged the party so much, they've taken everybody else out. But perhaps, just one thing, just perhaps, if Starmer's weak enough, the party's determined enough, and a civic campaign is strong enough, maybe we could get proportional voting for Westminster, and then something else is possible.
And then something else is possible. Once again, I totally concur with you, Robin. Yes, nothing's going to change. British establishment's going to have its own way, and it's just like you said. It's just, if some independents get in or whatever, and does better than expected and stuff, at least there'll be more discussion about it, which is all we can hope for. Like you said, so that maybe 5 years down the line, something will change a bit then. And
yeah, your head at one time every day, except when you fail, and then accept it, and then the next day work out what you can salvage from it and how you don't fail the next time. And you'll have multiple failures, because that's humanity. And if you're on the left and you're pro-independence and you're Scottish, you'll fail more than the average, right? But that's only a reason to get back up the next day and work out what you've still got in your pockets.
Yeah, exactly. Being a realist.
Promise everybody this, and maybe just leave you with this. The thing about democracy is you've always got a bit more in your pockets than you realise. And no, it feels like you're completely cut out, disorientated, disenfranchised, that there's no interest in you, that this era is one from which you are excluded. And that's largely true. And yet, if you pay attention, there's always more in your pocket than you think, and there's always more that you can do than you think. And the difference between taking that out of your pocket and doing something useful with it, David and Goliath, or skulking off and saying, the difference between those two things is you.
Brilliant. I do think that's a brilliant way to end. And like what stuck with me, the game is always there, like you said, Robin. I very much appreciate that. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to catch up with you in another couple of years or something, Robin.
That'd be great.
No, hopefully sooner. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and be nice to keep in touch and maybe catch you again.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
Thank you very much for your time, Robin.
Bye, folks.
You take care. Bye-bye.
Do